Calla vexedly steered the steel-blue sedan into the bay beside Magnolia Cemetery as the late autumn wind tugged at her scarf. Mira, in the back seat, shifted unhappily, clutching her coat. Esme fiddled with a ribbon in her hair, gazed downcast. Calla watched the headstones rise like silent monuments to secrets no one dared speak. She paused at Lenore Hartwell's grave, a modest stone etched with years of grief and betrayal. Calla hesitated, remembering how her mother's voice faded in the hospital night when she had whispered, "Find him." The cemetery gate squeaked. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel before stepping out. Myra's small voice broke the hush. "Mommy said don't trust anyone who comes looking." Calla drew in a breath that felt like cold water. She exhaled slowly. Today they were face to face with the past. Harlan Vexley appeared at the edge of the row of tombstones, tall, immaculate, his suit crisp against the gray sky. Calla's breath stumbled. The man who abandoned her mother, the man whose name still echoed in boardrooms and charities alike, was standing here. He regarded the girls with a flicker of something. Recognition? Guilt? Calla watched as he knelt, offering a tissue to Mira, who looked at him with wide suspicion. He touched a hand to the stone. "Lenore, what did you hide from me?" he whispered. Esme's arm brushed hers. Calla looked down and froze. A bruise smudged under a light blue sleeve. For a moment, the cemetery seemed to hold its breath. The caretaker's voice cracked nearby. "They'll need me shortly." Calla turned and saw the substitute younger woman, eyes darting, lips parted. Then she fled into a black SUV. Calla felt the chill of something sinister sliding past the headstones. Mira reached out and grabbed Calla's coat. "She left in a car, Mommy. Someone owns us." Calla's mind snapped back to the chain she spotted earlier, a heart-shaped pendant hiding under a flower pot. Inside was a note in Lenore's handwriting. "Find him." The weight of it pulled Calla forward and sideways, toward anger, toward truth. Harlan rose to his feet. He straightened his jacket and looked at Calla. The silence was a high wire. You're Calla?" he asked finally. The question exploded between them. Calla said nothing. Her daughters held each other tightly behind her. The caretaker's SUV pulled away. The graveyard wind picked up leaves like confetti of accusations. Calla reached for Myra's hand, feeling the tremor in the child's fingers. The man who built empires was now standing in a place he once thought he owned, the place where Lenore's story died. Calla stepped forward and said, softly but with steel, "I am her daughter, and we're leaving." Something shifted in Harlan's gaze, as though the scales had dropped. But Calla did not look back. She had come to the grave seeking closure. Instead, she found a beginning. 3 days had passed, but the silence at Calla's rented home in Charleston had only grown thicker. Mira no longer asked questions. She simply watched from behind the kitchen door or disappeared into the backyard, her distance more cutting than any outburst. Calla moved through the house like someone afraid to wake a sleeping ghost. Then, just after dawn, a white envelope with no return address slipped through the door slot. She sat with it under her fingertips for nearly an hour before opening it. The handwriting was Lenore's, delicate, familiar, and final. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "it means I failed to protect them." The paper trembled in Calla's hands. A rush of memory came unbidden. Her mother in a hospital gown, eyes darting toward the door, whispering half-formed thoughts before shutting down altogether. She had always wondered what her mother had wanted to say in those final hours. The answer was here, and it was unbearable. Lenore had tried to fight, but something or someone had always gotten in the way. Calla folded the letter slowly, her hands not quite steady. That afternoon, she drove to a quiet row house just off Broad Street, where Martha Delaney now lived in a garden-level apartment. The former housekeeper's eyes widened when she saw Calla. "You're her daughter. I knew you'd come," Martha said, her voice rough but kind. Martha served tea in chipped china and listened without interrupting. When Calla asked whether Lenore had ever tried to return to the Vexley estate, Martha nodded. Twice. Vera turned her away both times. She disappeared briefly and returned with a tiny phone. "I kept this. I shouldn't have, but it didn't feel right to delete it." The voicemail played softly. Lenore's voice trembled. "Please, I don't feel safe anymore. If anything happens, tell her the truth. Don't let them erase me." Calla stared at the phone like it was a weapon. They kept her out. They made sure she'd disappear. Martha's silence was confirmation enough. The following morning, Calla found herself sitting in a law office next to Gia Whitlock, who tapped a pencil against a legal pad with barely contained fury. Across from them sat Vera Vexley-Darrow, composed, smug, and holding a thick legal folder. "We're concerned about the environment Calla's created for the girls," Vera said. Harlan Vexley remained largely silent, but his eyes flickered uneasily. Vera handed over a document claiming Calla was unstable, citing fabricated episodes of postpartum depression and substance abuse. Gia flipped through the pages quickly. This psychiatrist never treated Calla. In fact, he doesn't even practice in this state. Calla felt heat crawl up her neck. "This is a lie." Vera's smile was tight. "It's concern, dear. Don't mistake it for malice." "Concern doesn't look like slander," Gia snapped. That evening, back at the Vexley estate, Colby extended an olive branch, a dinner invitation. But Calla knew better than to believe in peace offerings from a family that treated trust like currency. She arrived with guarded hope, only to find herself seated between Vera and Harlan. Midway through the meal, Vera's tone shifted. "We know about the letter, Calla. Don't think that gives you leverage." Mira stood in the hallway, half hidden. She wasn't supposed to hear, but she did. "Calla's always been unstable," Vera muttered. Later that night, as Calla helped Mira into bed, the girl whispered, "Why do they say you're dangerous?" Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 cracks in trust. Calla didn't answer. Instead, she sat at her desk and began writing. Not a rebuttal, just truth. A letter Mira could read when her heart was older, when her mind was less clouded by other people's noise. 2 days later, Gia stopped by with news. Esme had withdrawn during school. Flinching when her grandfather's name came up, Mira had told her teacher that Mommy lied. Calla paced the kitchen, holding back the scream rising in her chest. "They're getting to them," Gia said quietly. "Vera's talking to the press. Diane just filed an emergency injunction." Calla blinked. "Diane." Gia nodded. Her name circled in red in Lenore's letter. "She's not just a relative. She's the knife in the dark." Calla took the letter and reread it, her eyes resting on the name. Diane, the woman who had orchestrated the silence from the start. The doorbell rang just after midnight. Gia stood on the porch, breathless, a court order in her hand. "They're trying to take the girls tonight." Calla didn't break. She recalibrated. The courthouse loomed like an old judge's gavel hanging in the air. Calla Vexley walked the marble steps beside Gia Whitlock, each footstep echoing in the crisp November morning. Reporters clustered outside, lenses aimed with expectation. Inside, banners reading Vexley Media Holdings fluttered just out of view beyond the glass doors. The legacy of her grandfather, Harlan Vexley, weighed on her shoulders as heavily as the twin scarves wrapped around Mira and Esme. The promise of privacy had dissolved like morning mist. Her palms felt cool. Her heart refused to speed. Instead, it settled into a steady drumbeat of readiness. She thought of her mother, Lenore Hartwell, whispering in that hospital night, "Find him." Now, Calla would look the man down who abandoned her, the man whose name opened doors her mother could never cross. Harlan sat beside Vera Vexley and Colby Vexley, impeccable in suits, their faces composed, nearly smug. Judge Tomlinson ascended the bench, scan of his eyes quick. Calla straightened her spine. The room stilled. "Have you ever been judged by people who never lived your truth?" She wondered silently. The legal battle erupted. Diane, Vexley-Darrow's attorney, stepped forward, presenting phones held high, accusing Calla of outbursts of neglect, fabricating text messages with her daughters. The words blurred. Calla felt rage-hot and sharp. They built this case on lies. Gia leapt to object, demanding forensic reviews. The judge raised a hand. The gallery froze. Harlan's witness stand testimony was careful, rehearsed. Calla held herself still. Her gaze flicked to Myra's small shoes under the table. Then a napkin dropped. She bent to pick it up. The sheet of paper read, "Truth doesn't win in courtrooms. Power does." Calla's pulse sang with cold fury. She did not flinch. "When people tell your story, do they speak truth or protect themselves?" She asked no one. Mid-trial, Mira slipped from her advocate's side and walked the carpeted aisle of the courtroom. Calla watched the small pink backpack with surprise. Mira reached the bench and whispered he never listened, but she did. The judge halted proceedings. The courtroom froze like a photograph. A child's truth echoed louder than lawyers. Calla felt proud. The photograph of her feariness had torn. The tide shifted. Footage flickered on a screen. Diane's own home surveillance showed her grabbing Esme's arm. The little girl's cry stifled by a hand. Shock rippled. Vera turned as pale as Lincoln granite. Harlan's gaze dropped. Calla's throat itched. The judge's gavel slammed. Silence thundered. Justice unmasked guilt. Martha Delaney stepped forward then, older now, weary but unbowed. She handed an envelope to Calla's trembling fingers. Inside was Lenore's final letter, dated the night before her death. Clear, luminous, merciless. "You will reclaim your strength," it said. Calla stood and read aloud. She felt power rise in her chest, shame fall from their shoulders. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the heaviest truths. Agree? The courtroom wept. The gallery exhaled. When judgment was read, the gavel still hung. The judge granted custody to Calla. Relief translated into a quiet hum inside her. But then a bailiff whispered to the judge. The judge frowned. "There's one more matter, Mr. Vexley. Please remain in the courtroom." Calla inhaled crisp air, the cold around her a reminder. Truth won the day, but debts of the past were not yet paid.